Joe on your Sunday morning, you've come to the right place. There you go, folks. I'm not sure what the song is, but Josh is up to something over there. Joining me on the phone is Jessica Scott-Reid. She wrote an interesting op-ed in the Globe and Mail. Fish should be part of the animal welfare conversation. Jessica Scott-Reid is a Montreal-based writer and an animal advocate. She's been on the show before. Jessica, how are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me back.
You got it. So an interesting read. Now, I grew up at a time when we were told that fish didn't have any feelings at all. We went out and caught fish and would catch them, and I don't fish anymore, but that's the old misnomer, and that's apparently alive and well, right? That idea that fish don't feel anything?
Exactly, and I was raised exactly the same. I was taken fishing when I was a child, told they were too stupid, too simple, to not worry about that hook in their mouth. We were all raised that way, I think.
Right. So you, I guess, were inspired to write about this in light of Newfoundland Northern Harvest Sea Farm, and I've talked about this on the show. It was gruesome. 1.8 million salmon suffocated to death in early September, and I do believe there was some issues even with the company reporting this information. I think it leaked out, but that's another sidebar. But that was a really ugly find, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think the story is extremely disturbing, and it gives us a good jumping-off point to talk about this emerging research about fish sentience and to start a conversation about perhaps the way we are farming and catching and treating fish might be cruel.
So what does the science tell us when it comes to what fish do feel or not? What do we know for sure?
Yeah, so these things have been coming up over the last few years, more and more emerging research that's showing that fish actually respond to pain in ways that we didn't really expect before, that they have different mechanisms in their brains, neurotransmitters that actually are similar to humans in that they can sense pain and they react to pain. They produce opioids just the same as humans do to counteract painful experiences. So it's growing research showing us that, in fact, fish do feel pain.
Any idea why this has been so slow to come to light?
Well, I think it's just a priority thing. I mean, we're seeing this sort of emerging with all different animals. In fact, when we talk about different farming methods across Canada, across the world, this is a growing conversation regarding all animals. And I think because fish are, long considered perhaps the most simple, this has been sort of the last along the line of this growing research about animal sentience.
Okay, so when it comes to the practice of salmon farming, fish pen farming, this industry is just exploding, and it's now becoming a really key part of economy, specifically in rural areas. So you're always going to get a lot of pushback, right, when you've got economics at play and jobs at play. What do you tell people who work in that industry and rely on that industry and defend the industry?
Of course, money is always the bottom line. You don't want people to be losing their livelihood. But when we look at issues like climate change, which is, sort of a driving factor behind this idea of people switching to a more plant-based diet, it's people living in coastal communities that are likely to suffer first and suffer the worst. That's what the research is telling us. So, in fact, it's looking out for these people that we are promoting more of a plant-based diet and moving away from animal-based proteins. It's for their benefit.
Mm-hmm. One of the big challenges, though, in my opinion, is you drive by, if you're even in the vicinity, and most people obviously aren't, they don't live along the coast, but they drive by one of these pens and you don't see anything. Everything's literally under the surface. So therefore, because it's under the surface, it's out of sight, it's out of mind. That's a challenge, isn't it, in order to move the dialogue to where you think it should be?
I mean, we could say that about all types of animal farming, but you're absolutely right. Out of sight, out of mind. We say the same thing about, moving industrialized farming from outside in the fields to inside into large sheds, right, behind closed doors. If slaughterhouse had glass walls, right, it's that whole idea that bringing these things to the public consciousness is the challenge. And I think things like social media, things like allowing people like me to write op-eds like this is what's finally showing the public things that have been so long been hidden.
Yeah, and not only that, but again, we go in the grocery store and there's lobster in fish tanks, right, sitting there all piled on top of each other, and we don't even bat an eye at it. Why do you think that it's just conditioning, right? We just and not conditioning, but we've been told these creatures don't feel anything. They have no value other than what we can get out of them. That's true, isn't it?
Right. It starts from childhood. I mean, I was raised the same way to believe that that's their purpose on Earth, and that the way that we treat them and the way that we kill them is as humane as possible. We like to think in Canada that we do things better than other places, but lobster, for instance, there's again been a lot of emerging research about it. In fact, that they are far more sentient than we ever believed, that they mate for life, that they mourn the loss of their partners. And places like Switzerland, for example, where they've banned the boiling of lobsters alive because it's been shown to be extremely cruel. But of course, I grew up doing exactly that and being told, oh, it's fine, they don't feel anything. And now we're learning differently.
What type of feedback do you get from this? I imagine you get some good and probably a lot of negative as well. What do you hear from people?
Yeah, I mean, every time I write an op-ed, the Globe and Mail or other publications about these things, I get it from both sides. Thankfully, there's a lot of support for what I'm saying. It seems there is a growing number of people across Canada who are learning about the sentience of animals and questioning the way that we do things. But of course, there's always pushback. I get a lot of farmers on Twitter that like to tweet at me. And now, of course, I've tapped into another community in the fishing industry, people who are really just defending their livelihood, defending their culture, and I understand that. And I'm always open to having those conversations via social media. I've learned a lot that way, actually.
But I think logically, though, if you look at it and you take emotion aside and you say 1.8 million fish suffocating in a pen because they can't breathe, and then falling to the bottom of the ocean and dying in a mass of carcasses, that ain't pretty. I don't care who you are. There's no way you can square that up into anything other than ugly, right?
Right. I mean, I think it definitely shows that there's a huge flaw in the system that, we're trying to say is very modern and very economical and perhaps humane. Obviously, something is very wrong with this way of producing fish. If this can happen to this scale, this amount of cruelty, this amount of environmental harm, something is fundamentally wrong.
What about moving these facilities inland? We've heard that that's the movement for a few reasons. But what are your thoughts on that? Would that be a better model at all?
I mean, there's always less cruel or less environmentally risky. But when you're talking about breeding and exploiting and killing animals, there really is no right way to do it. Fish don't fall under any sort of animal welfare protection in Canada. They're not part of the Humane Slaughter Act. So the way that they're in the end killed is absolutely cruel and completely not standardized in any way.
Jessica, thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate it. It was an interesting read.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, take care. Jessica Scott-Reid, Montreal-based writer and animal advocate. A few things I want to talk about.